Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for appearing before us. It is your duty and mine, all of ours here, to protect our American homeland and our citizens, but to do so in a way that is legal, that is humane, that is effective, and principally constitutional. So let's get to that. Foundational to the administration's entire immigration agenda and to everything we've seen in the streets of Minneapolis and other cities across our country is your pursuit of higher and higher numbers for deportation, the mass deportations that Stephen Miller designed and President Trump has ordered you to implement. It's why we have roving patrols, racially profiling whomever they see and creating a show-me-your-papers state. It's why you go into sensitive locations like churches and hospitals and schools. It's why you have been arresting children, the elderly, refugees, the disabled, including a resident in my own state suffering from severe developmental disabilities. When there's pressure on you to hit high numbers, you don't have the time to focus on targeted effects to find violent criminals on the run. It's easier to simply round up people here breaking no laws and contributing to our communities. It's why you deny people due process and rush them out of the country. And it's why you've put poorly trained ICE recruits on our streets engaging in reckless and dangerous tactics. Does DHS, Madam Secretary, operate on any quotas or numerical targets for immigration arrests every day?
No, Senator, we do not. We do targeted law enforcement operations going after those worst of the worst criminals that are here illegally.
I would certainly prefer it if you did targeted operations against the worst of the worst. But just last year, Stephen Miller, who's the President's Homeland Security Advisor and Deputy Chief of Staff, went on Fox News and said, we're setting a goal, a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day. And President Trump is going to keep pushing to get that number higher and higher. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor, and he oversees immigration policy for the President. What's your response to his public quote?
Sir, there is no quotas at the Department of Homeland Security. When we do law enforcement operations, we do them on targeted enforcement, getting public safety threats off of our streets and out of our communities to protect the American people.
Thank you. And you agree that setting quotas would actually put improper pressure on law enforcement to conduct themselves in ways that might not be in the best interest of their safety or the public.
Senator, we don't have any quotas on our law enforcement
operations. Have you ever issued
any
guidance rejecting the use of numerical targets or quotas?
I usually put out notices on things that are impacting our operations. There's been no discussion or requirement on numerical quota targets. Therefore, there would be no need to reject them in a memo unless I feared that they were being implemented, which they're not.
Here's why I think there might be real value in your putting out a memo saying, I reject any quotas. It's not just what Stephen Miller said last May. He's reportedly, and I have many press accounts of this I can submit for the record, making conference calls, berating agency officials, threatening to fire them, threatening to fire the leadership of field offices that are in the bottom 10% of arrest numbers. I would suggest that it's this constant drive for higher numbers that has been behind a lot of what we've been seeing in terms of the failure to actually focus on the worst of the worst and targeted enforcement, and to instead do things like roving patrols and profiling. Let's move on. Steve Bannon, long an advisor to the President, one of his earliest public supporters, recently said that ICE should be deployed at the polls in the next election. Will you rule out the deployment of ICE or CBP to polling places this November?
There are no plans to have ICE officers at our polling locations. And
I'm glad to hear that, but would you rule it out? Would you say it will not happen?
Do you plan on illegal aliens voting in our elections, Senator?
I do not. In
okay,
fact,
then
the
there
Heritage
should be no
Foundation,
need to, unless you plan on illegal aliens
Secretary,
voting.
The Heritage Foundation recently concluded that over a 20-year period where they reviewed hundreds of millions, billions of voting cases, they found only a small handful of actual cases of illegals voting. So I'm concerned by your rebuttal, which suggests you may be unfamiliar with 18 U.S.C. Section 592. Are you familiar with this federal statute that relates to sending armed men to polling places?
There are no plans to send any of our law enforcement officers to polling locations.
But, Madam Secretary, you're clear it would
be a
federal crime for you to do so.
There are illegal aliens that have voted, and it's been proven in the past in certain cases in certain states. We provide a program to states. I think we have 27 different states that utilize our SAVE program now to verify individuals that are eligible to vote in their elections. And as states run their election systems, we encourage them to use that to make sure they maintain their election integrity.
Madam Secretary, can you understand how when Steve Bannon says publicly, we should have ICE at the polls, and you say there are no plans, that's not enough to rule out the possibility of a violation of this long-standing federal law? Will you issue a directive that ICE and CBP should be nowhere near polling places this November?
We have no plans to have ICE officers or law enforcement at polling locations. States are responsible for running their elections, and we're giving them tools and mitigation efforts that they can utilize in order to make sure they maintain the integrity of those elections and that individuals can trust their systems to ensure that their vote counts.
Let me move on to training. I was long responsible for the second largest police agency in Delaware. I understand and recognize the critical role that training plays in keeping law enforcement officers safe, in making sure that they perform their important duties as effectively as possible, and that they understand the obligations of policing in a democracy. A whistleblower recently testified that ICE's training process is, quote, deficient, defective, and broken, raising concerns about how you cut training time in half, reducing training hours by 240, and cut out key courses on the use of force and constitutional obligations. He also testified to a culture of fear that pervades ICE and a constant effort to churn out more trained officers in order to achieve higher numbers. Your department put out a statement that the training is the same number of hours that officers have always received. So let's be clear. Is it your sworn testimony today, Madam Secretary, that training hours have not been reduced for any recruit compared to where they were, say, a year ago?
Senator, our ICE officers are trained when they come on board the department 56 days. We've changed the format of those days. Instead of 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, they now do 6 days a week, 12-hour days. We also give them 28 days of on-the-job training so they can have more hands-on experience with individuals that have served a longer period of time in law enforcement and have that experienced officer supporting them going forward. What I would say about your whistleblower is that your whistleblower came to FLETC, which is the area academy where we train over 130 different federal law enforcement agencies. He came there after we had changed our program and didn't experience how we trained our ICE officers previous to that on those 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. I don't know how he would speak to how ICE used to do that, and this individual was only detailed there for a short period of time, a few months, and was a trial attorney, not an expert
in a number of places around the country have faced protests for how they've been conducting their policing. Do you specifically train your new recruits on how to handle peaceful protesters in the context of the First Amendment and their rights?
Yes, they are trained in that, and they are annually trained and updated with legal guidance, with constitutional provisions, de-escalation techniques, in driving techniques, medical aid, intervening, use of force. All of those are things that our individual officers are trained on. What has happened?
January 22nd, you put out a press release that said enforcement and removal operations, ERO training, was 42 days. But on February 23rd, just a month later, the same day that the whistleblower testified, you issued a new press release saying it was 56 days. You seem to be making it up as you go along. Help me understand how you square those quite different numbers in terms of the total number of training days.
Our training for ICE officers is at 56 days with 28 days of on-the-job experience that they get as well. That continues their training, and their specialized training is above and beyond that as well. And we're grateful for those individuals, many of those individuals that have come and joined ICE. We had over 220,000 individuals apply to become ICE officers. We've hired approximately 12,000 of those, and many of those had previous law enforcement experience when they came to serve with us.
Last question, Madam Secretary, about Afghans. Americans fought, served, and died in Afghanistan over 20 years. Many of our service members critically relied on translators and on Afghans who served and fought alongside them. I've gotten to know a number of them who came to this country and were thoroughly vetted and were frankly heroes who had risked their lives alongside Americans. At the moment, I believe your leadership at DHS has abandoned our commitment to the Afghans who served alongside us. There are currently many trapped in a center in Qatar, and at least 150 of them are the family of current active-duty U.S. military forces. It is within your power to create a process for them to seek waivers of the refugee ban so they could come into the United States. Will you consider doing so?
We'll continue to do our due diligence on vetting individuals that come into this country, especially those who came in on a refugee program, and make sure that vetting process was thorough. We found deficiencies in how the Biden administration was doing that.
Will you commit to not
and I'll look
forcing
into
any
the
of them back
situation.
into the waiting arms of the Taliban, who will certainly torture or kill them?
We'll continue to look at every situation and make sure they qualify for the programs to how they're laid out in statute.
Madam Secretary, as I said at the outset, it's your obligation and mine to protect our homeland and American citizens in a way that is legal, effective, humane, and constitutional. My concern is that across all the different incidents that have been spoken about today, you are failing to do so. You are failing to deliver legal, humane, effective, and constitutional protection for the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Support journalism you trust. Support PBS News. Donate now, or even better, start a monthly contribution today.